Yali Madad, and welcome to this evening's webinar. Thank you for joining us for an informative and engaging session on self-care and preventing caregiver burnout. My name is Safina Alidina, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion this evening. As the co-lead for the Mental Health and Addictions portfolio with the Aga Khan Health Board for Ontario, the topics of mental health, resilience, burnout are top of mind for me as we seek to understand how to better support mental health across our Jamaat. I was looking at my calendar today and was shocked to realize that we are now at over 3 months since the quarantine began. In some ways, it feels like this time has gone by in the blink of an eye. And in other ways, it feels like it has been this way forever. It's hard to even remember a time when we could go out to sit in restaurants, hug our friends, travel on a plane, or do something as basic as get a haircut. Over these past few months, many of us have been trying to balance our work and home responsibilities as we navigate the new normal. With these lines between work, home, and other areas such as volunteering increasingly blurring, it can sometimes feel like we are constantly caring for others and not taking enough time for our own health. This situation is further complicated for those of us who may be caring for family members with mental health needs. To address these topics, I am very excited to introduce you to our speaker this evening, Dr. Saira Sabzali. Alwaiza Dr. Saira Sabzali is a therapist with a PhD in transpersonal psychology. She also teaches in the clinical counseling program at Sternberg College. She has delivered 2 TEDx talks and loves public speaking. She has a podcast with her husband called Sabzi Life, where they talk about conscious living, and her YouTube channel is Dragonfly Wellness TV. Dr. Saira has served in various institutional capacities over the past 20 years, including leadership roles on the Education Board, Social Welfare Board, ITHRB, Youth and Sports, and the Women's Portfolio. She has also served for 2 terms as the National Member for Mental Health on the Aga Khan Health Board. She lives in Vancouver with her husband and 2 kids. We have been very fortunate to have Dr. Saira with us for several sessions throughout our programming. This evening, she will be diving into the topic of self-care and preventing caregiver burnout. Before I hand it off to our wonderful speaker, a couple of quick administrative items to cover. We'd like to make the session interactive, so please feel free to submit your questions using the chat function, and we will address them at the end. Also, the webinar will be recorded and will be available afterwards on iacanada.org. And finally, there's a handout that you can access through the webinar. And so if you're worried about taking notes during the session, feel free to reference the handout, and this can be helpful for keeping track of some of the takeaways from the session. And with that, Dr. Saira will take it from here, and I will rejoin you to moderate some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Safina. Okay, so here we are, all 190 of us so far, and we're talking about caregiver burnout. It's a topic that it's kind of hard to talk about, right? Because when we're caregivers, it's hard to admit that we're tired. And so we're going to go into a little bit of definitions about what is a caregiver, what is burnout. It's going to be a bit of a journey. So we'll start kind of simple and we'll get more and more complex as we go. One of the things that was really important for me as I was kind of developing and doing the thinking around this session was what is a caregiver, right? What is a caregiver, and how do we perhaps in our cultural community, our faith community, see caregiving, and what's that about? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. The definition of caregiver is a family member or a paid helper that regularly looks after someone who is sick. And so this could be physical illness, this could be mental illness, but that's kind of the definition, the standard definition of a caregiver. So what is burnout? You know that you have burnout, but sometimes it's hard to define, like, what actually is it? So burnout is a state of chronic stress, okay? So there's been stress for a long period of time, and suddenly you're feeling exhausted. So you're physically exhausted, you're emotionally exhausted. There's these feelings of cynicism, detachment, lack of feelings of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment, all of these different pieces. And thank you so much. There's people who reached out actually before this webinar, throughout the week and sent me resources. And thank you so much for those resources. There was an article in the New York Times today or yesterday around parental burnout. And there's some particular pieces around that, which I thought I'd added to the slide, but we'll get to that later, around for parents, because parenting is considered like a duty rather than a choice. So, and some of the caregiving things can feel like a duty. So then how do we fit that together, right? Because I do presentations on burnout at work, how to deal with work-life balance. But when your burnout is about the environment that you're in, it gets a little bit more nuanced. And so we're gonna kind of go through that together. So this is where I wanted to do some thinking. So I did a presentation with a colleague of mine who's a project manager many, many years ago. And we did a workshop on transforming sacrifice into service. And so these are some notes from that workshop, and they're on the handout. So don't feel like you have to write it all down. They are available for later. But the reason we came up with this is because with caregiving, we want, okay, how do I say this? In our community, right? In our cultural community, in our faith community, service is one of our pillars, right? So one of the foundational pieces. And so when we're doing something that is considered service, it's much harder to ask for help. It's much harder to admit that we're having a hard time because it's seva, right? It's service. Like you should be fine because it's your seva. And so I've actually done quite a few of these trainings for IVC and Mukhi Kamriya groups around when it's seva, when it's service, how does that change the flavor of burnout, right? What does that mean? And what do we do about it? How do we change our responses when it's not just about doing a job, but it's actually about a seva or service? So let's look through this, this kind of chart, right? So the first thing is, in seva, in service, both sides are benefiting, right? So the person who's giving is actually getting something. Whereas with sacrifice, one or both might lose something. So I'm using these two definitions. Other people might define sacrifice in a different way. Just for the purposes of this presentation, this is how we're going to define our terms. So with service, both sides are benefiting. With sacrifice, somebody's losing something. When we're in a space of service, we're actually lifted up by the experience, right? It warms us, it makes us feel good to give. But when we're now moving into a place of sacrifice, we actually feel like we're giving a part of ourselves, right? We feel like something is being taken from us rather than something being gifted to us. When we're in a place of service, we have clear boundaries. But when we move the needle and it goes into sacrifice, now we don't know how to set our boundaries. There's this lack of boundaries. Some of the pieces around how we feel, right? So joy, increased energy when you're doing your seva, but when it kind of pops in again to service, then we're tired. We have a loss of energy. We feel like we can't keep up. So these are some of the different ideas, right? So I don't want to read through. You can kind of look through, but the couple that I want to highlight to you is this one here that says compassionate versus driven by guilt. Right? Service comes from a place of wanting to genuinely help the other. Whereas when you're in sacrifice if you're feeling guilty. This is really important. This is a theme that we're going to keep coming back to. So the idea is that as caregivers, naturally caregivers for our family members, we're going to be starting in a place of service. But if we don't look after ourselves and we don't do some of the tools that I'm going to talk about, then we kind of go into the other side of this, which is sacrifice. And so this presentation is about, first of all, defining what it is that we want to be doing, what it is that we kind of don't want to be doing, and how to stay kind of on one side of this continuum. With service, we remember that there's a choice. We remember that you can say yes, you can say no. We actually check in with ourselves, like, how do I feel about that? Whereas when you're in sacrifice, you feel like you can't say no. You're kind of stuck in that automatic yes. You've forgotten that there's any choice here. It doesn't feel like there's any choice here. When we're in service, we don't actually compare ourselves to other people. But if you're in sacrifice, you'll find that we're kind of keeping score. Why am I doing all this and you're not doing it, right? And then what happens is that there's this kind of Accounts must be settled, right? I'm keeping count and eventually I better get mine. And so if I'm not getting mine, I'm getting even more upset, right? So this is how we know where we are. We don't have expectations, has your mom, on our pin, IVC pin, it says work, no words, right? There's no expectations. You're doing it for the love of it. But when we're in sacrifice, there are some hidden expectations. We want to be recognized. We want to be rewarded. We want to be thanked. And if we don't get those things, it can be very frustrating and upsetting. A couple more. When we're in service, you feel like you're enough and you're doing enough, right? And one of the reasons you feel that in service is because in service, we're actually linked to the higher, right? We're linked to that divine presence, and that kind of fuels us and gives us the energy. When we're in sacrifice, we're judging ourselves. We're saying, I'm not doing enough, right? Or everybody else isn't doing enough. And it just feels like there's limited time, limited resources, and everything feels intense when we're in sacrifice. So as I mentioned, in service, there aren't any feelings of guilt, but in sacrifice, we're now judging others, we're feeling guilty ourselves. So these are some of the differences. I wish I was in a room with you right now, because I would love to look around and see you nodding or smiling. So I know you got it, but I think you got it. And again, as we mentioned earlier, please feel free to put any questions that you have in using the chat function so that we can answer your questions. I might answer them as we go if they're relevant. I might wait till the end, but we're going to be about an hour in total for this presentation. I want to say any questions, but I'm not with you, so we'll move to the next slide. I want to share this with you, which is, again, something that my colleague and I designed, which is the path to burnout. So burnout looks different when it's at work versus when it's a caregiver burnout. When it's caregiver burnout, or you're doing something out of the goodness of your heart, out of wanting to help someone, it's a little bit different, because there isn't that doing it for a paycheck, right? It's a different reason. And so when we start helping the people in our lives, whether those be our children, whether those be our loved ones who are physically ill, whether that's our loved ones who are mentally ill, we feel this sense of inspiration, like, I'm here for you, I want to be here for you, and it feels good, right? And then we move to the next spot, which is busyness. Get kind of busy. Again, this is on your handout, so you'll have it. You get busy and you think you start finding yourself doing more and more and more. And as you do more, and it's funny, when I give this talk to IVC, I say, once people see you as a leader, they'll ask you for more, right? They'll ask you for more and more and more. And suddenly you're part of this webinar, you're part of this organization, you're part of this, like all of a sudden different people are asking you to participate because they're seeing that inspiration that's in you. And then we get to this moment, this really sweet moment of fulfillment. And maybe if you've offered your seva in a Jamati context, or in in the wider community context, you might have felt that feeling of just fulfillment, or even in your own family, where it's like, oh, that felt so good to help. So what happens at that moment where it felt so good to help is, in that moment, we have a choice to make. And most of us don't know this, and that's why we end up getting into burnout. So at that moment of fulfillment, we have a choice to make about, do I keep going? Do I take a break? Or do I build my capacity? What needs to happen? If I'm going to keep going, I better make sure that I've built my capacity. So let me explain that. When your jobs and the things that were expected of you were this much, and you were doing, your capacity was this much, then you felt full. Like you felt like you were doing all you could. And so at this point of fulfillment, we have to be willing to stretch our container. Is one of my teachers says, stretch our container. And so now the things that you're being asked to do are manageable because you feel bigger. You feel like you have more resources. You feel more supported. Now the question is going to be, how do I do that? And we're going to get to some of those tools near the end of the presentation. But this is the point. Most people don't make this point, this decision, until they get to tired, right? But once they're in tired, it's just a downhill. It's a downhill dive, and it eventually feels like too much, and that's burnout. So if we can remember at that point of fulfillment that this is the moment to gather my resources, to my spiritual resources, my material resources, the human resources that are around me, so that I can do the next part, it'll be more likely. So I call that choosing again. Then you're now moving into leadership, right? Leadership is where people look to you to guide them and to help them move forward. And it's not an easy place to be in, because you have to continually be doing your own work and continually finding ways to, to stretch. And one of the things I found, and this might be my YZine hat, is one of the things that helps me stretch is that connection, that relationship, right? And so that can look like different things to different people, and we'll talk about that later on. So I kind of just mentioned this, right, about managing your capacity. So I picked this picture of chai. I think it's actually coffee, but we're going to call it chai, because when I was in India, I went to India for the first time when I was a teenager, and there were these chaiwalas, right? And they had these cups of chai, and they would pour chai, and it's like they're holding it like way up here, and the chai is pouring. It was such a spectacle, right, to watch the chai come from the chaiwala. And so this picture reminded me of that. And one of my colleagues in England, actually, she talks about how, it's about giving from the saucer, not from the cup. It's about giving from the saucer, not from the cup. So what we're trying to do is fill our cup overflowing, so that then we give from the pyali, from the saucer. So a memory I have is of my dad and my uncles, back in the day when we were kids, they would actually pour chai into the saucer and drink it from the saucer, right? Because it would cool it down more quickly. And so that's what we're talking about here. It's about your cup is so full that you have extra chai in your saucer, and you give that saucer to the people around you. Don't give the cup. Don't give the cup. And be sure that you keep refilling the cup. Because if you don't refill the cup, it goes down, 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 and suddenly you're empty, right? You have no energy, you have no capacity. So you're going to ask, well, Dr. Saira, how do I fill the cup? What do I do to fill the cup? So one of the things is, again, that connection. But there's, again, other very specific tools that I'm going to give you. But it's important to know our capacity as well. During COVID-19, many of us have taken a hit as far as our own wellness, right? It's hard to just do the day-to-day with all of the COVID-19 and all the things that are happening politically in the world. There's a lot going on. And so our capacity may have shrunk, because we're just trying to manage and just trying to get through. And from a neuroscience perspective, many of us are in survival mode right now from a brain perspective. And when you're in survival mode, you're not very good at decision making, you're not very good at social interaction, you're not very good at long-term planning. It's about being in the moment and just getting through this moment, right? And so when we're living like that, it can be easy to forget that, oh, wait a minute, my cup is getting empty. So we have to really be thoughtful, and nobody else can do it for you, right? You're the one who has to say, oh my goodness, I'm feeling drained. I need to stop and I need to recalibrate myself. Sometimes you may notice family members or friends, and you're noticing that they're burning out. One of the best things you can do is be one of those human resources then in their circle, right? If you're not burnt out and you're feeling good, you're feeling full, but you're noticing that, oh, my partner or my child or my boss or somebody else I care about needs a little extra support, well, then you can give it when you have it. And when you don't have it, someone can give it to you. One of the things that this pandemic has shown us is how much we need people. How much we need people. My second TED Talk was called People Matter More Than Things. Right? You can find it on YouTube. People matter more than things. And this is true now more than ever. We're realizing how important people are. But you can't be everything to everyone. Right? You have to kind of choose where you're going to put your time and your energy, and also make sure that you do choose some of that time and energy for you. So let's talk specifically about supporting those with mental illness, because there's different kinds of caregiving. And with mental illness, it can be even that much more kind of taxing on the family, right? So whether that's depression, whether that's anxiety, whether that's schizophrenia, whether that's addiction, there's all of these things that are happening in people's homes, and it's a lot, right? I know as a therapist, so I've found with my clients, those who have a pre-existing mental health condition are finding this time really hard. We all are finding this time really hard, but those with mental illness have that additional burden of now dealing with it in addition to dealing with their mental illness. And so there can be some frustration, there can be some sadness, there can be some numbing out that happens with people who are living already with mental illness. It can feel like nothing we do is enough, right? So if you're supporting, for example, somebody who has depression, and you're trying to be cheerful and you're trying to be supportive and you're trying to, do the things they need, but they just don't seem to be getting better. And it can feel frustrating and it can feel disempowering. Like, I'm trying everything I can think of. Why are you not getting better? And what I want to remind you is that you're not their therapist. You're not their doctor. You're their family member. And so the kind of support that you provide isn't necessarily going to heal them or cure them. And, and there's all these debates about mental illness and recovery versus cure, etc. But your job is not to fix them. Your job is to love them. I'm going to say that again. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to love them. Love them through these difficult times. And sometimes love means taking a little bit of space for yourself, right? Sometimes love means calling other people in to help. And so I want to talk about this concept that I've developed called care. And if you've been to any of my presentations before, this might look familiar to you, but there's kind of an approach to caring that I think is really in alignment with our value system. And so let's go through that together. So it's connection, authenticity, responsiveness, and excellence. So what does this mean? So connection is the first step. If you are not connected to yourself, to your God, and to the other, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. It's going to feel exhausting. It's going to feel frustrating. It's going to feel overwhelming. So first thing is we connect to the self, right? What is it that I want? What's going on with me? How do I get through this? And then, depending on who you are, you might choose to connect with the other first or choose to connect with the divine presence, whatever order works for you. But the connection to the other humans around you and to the divine presence, we have to do that first. Because if you're not doing that, your chai cup is empty, right? That's what pours it in. What pours it in from the love of the people around you and the support of the people around you. And sometimes when I talk to this, I had a talk with lawyers last week, and I was kind of teaching them this, and like, really, Dr. Syra, like, love, it seems so woo-woo. But what we found is physical presence of other humans when they are in a still space. So when you are feeling calm and fine and relaxed, if you're in the room with someone else who's charged up, your body can actually help calm down their body if you stay in that still place. If you don't let them, or they'll activate you. One or the other will happen, right? And that's how, because we have in our brains, we have these mirror neurons, like, looking in a mirror. And so babies have a lot of them. And that's why when you smile, the baby smiles, right? And as we grow, we still have these mirror neurons. And so for those of us who are kind of intuitive and connected, when we're around other people, we tune into them and we kind of sometimes even feel what they're feeling. And so it's really important for us to connect back to ourselves, to make sure we know what we're feeling, to know what's mine and what's not mine, right? What I can love you through, but it's actually not mine. Really, really important connection. The next one is authenticity. And so authenticity is about being real. And I often have this debate with my husband about being real, because as a therapist, our training is to be kind of a landing board for you, right? It's not about me, it's about your needs. But when I come to these presentations, or even when I'm working with clients, it's so important to be real. So important. You know how it feels when you ask someone how they're doing and they say fine, but they're not fine. Makes you feel crazy, right? To be real and to let the people in your life know that, today's been a tough day. I'm going to need to go to bed early. Or can I just have 20 minutes? I'm just going to go for a walk. To be real about what you need and where you're at. We can't be superheroes. And I'll talk about heroes later, right? But it's not healthy. And it's not sustainable. And so being authentic, being honest about where you're at. Then we have responsiveness. Now, again, if we were all in a room together, I would do a little acting and show you this one, but I'll just do it here in my chair. Responsiveness. So there's a word, responsibility, right? We've all heard that word, responsibility. And what responsibility feels like. in the body and in the mind is, okay, here I'm responsible for my children. That's the weight. I'm responsible for myself. That's a weight. I'm responsible for my clients. That's another weight. I'm responsible for my in-laws. That's another weight. I'm responsible for my parents. That's another weight. I'm responsible for the food and making sure that there's enough food in the house. And it's like, right? It's like, it's too heavy. It's just too heavy. And responsiveness is different, right? Responsiveness isn't one thing piling on the other, on the other, on the other. Responsiveness is being willing to be in this present moment right now and respond to whatever's coming at me. So if what's coming at me is a text message from my sister, okay, I'll respond to that text message. If what's coming at me is my daughter needs a hug, okay, I give her a hug. If what's coming at me is a client is calling and it's 10 p.m., oh, that's the one I'm not going to respond to right now, right? Because that's my boundary. So being responsive in the moment. And if 5 things are coming at you at the same time, then you stop 4 of them and you deal with 1. You respond to one thing at a time. That's responsiveness. And responsiveness is more like a dance, right? You're kind of seeing what's coming in and you're working with it rather than this heavy weight on my shoulders, because that just makes you glum and it makes you not that great to be around either, right? So responsiveness. And finally, I have to mention excellence, right? So in our community, How's Your Mom talks about excellence in so many different areas. And I would say, why not excellence in our human interactions as well? Why not put ourselves to that standard? And perfection is in the hands of God. Only God is perfect, but we can strive for excellence. And so what does that look like? That means we do our utmost best. And when we can't do our best, we take time to recover to come back. Excellence, right? And what I've noticed is when I start treating people from that level and really trying to have that excellence as one of my qualities, they start treating me in similar ways, even those who are living with mental illnesses. Some don't have the capacity for that, and that's okay. But excellence, not being okay with just getting by. Now, I'm going to qualify that. Right now we're in COVID-19. Some things you're going to have to let slide, right? You have to decide what are the things that really, like one of the things I've decided doesn't really matter is the dust on the, I don't know if there's any other cleaning people out there, but the baseboards, and then there's that dust on top of the baseboards. So I've decided during COVID-19, that dust is going to have to be okay. I see it every so often. I clean it when I can, but I cannot keep the dust off the baseboards because I do not have the bandwidth to pay attention to that. Right? What I want to pay attention to is, are my children getting a part of me every day? Are my clients getting the best of me every day? Not the baseboards. And so I've made a decision, the baseboards don't matter. I don't even think the people in my household know this. They'll laugh when they rewatch this. But we have to see what's important and what's okay to put on the side for now. And so then when we decide what's important, then we do that with excellence. Right? And that can change. Right? In 6 weeks, I might decide, okay, I'm ready for the baseboards now. I have the energy to pay attention to that now. Or I might not. And so knowing that as we go, we're also evolving and changing, and that's why connection to self is so important. So that's a tool for you, right? Of how to, when we're working with our family members who have mental illness, and it can feel, like I said, it can feel draining, tiring, coming back to caring, coming back to care, connection, authenticity, responsiveness, excellence. The other thing to ask yourself when you're in a conflict with somebody in your household is, how old are you? So can you see from this picture, there's, we're assuming it's a mom and a daughter, and they're mad at each other, right? Who's more likely to be able to get them out of this situation? Probably the mom, right? The mom is the one who has to kind of work through her feelings and then show up for her kid and teach her and talk to her and explain or whatever. But if she continues to do that, right, for the next 2 hours, that's really going to impact her child because she's acting like a child. So when you're in conflict, often one of the people is acting really young, and it might be you. And so to ask yourself, how old am I right now? I'm a 2-year-old. I'm kind of throwing a tantrum right now. Okay, interesting. And then I check in like, okay, 2-year-old. I want to do something to have a little bit more fun and bring back that 2-year-old, not in a tantrum way, but in a finger painting way or whatever it is. So how old am I is a really important question. When you're getting triggered and activated by the people in your household, how old am I? You might feel really, really, really confrontational, right? So that's the teenager part that wants to like fight and make their own, be in charge, and they don't have the power to be in charge yet. And so if you have a teenager, you might find yourself regressing and fighting with them at their level. And that's not going to work. It's just not. Somebody has to be the adult. And so that's another question, another tool that we can use for ourselves about, okay, how do I get through this? Well, let me check in. How old am I feeling right now? I'm feeling like an 8-year-old that has too much responsibility and is overwhelmed. Okay, so let's put that 8-year-old aside, let her play in the park, and let me be a grown-up right now. It takes a lot of, again, that connection to self, that self-reflection. The other thing I want to mention is that you are not alone. And I picked this picture specifically because for those of you who know the game of chess, you know that the king, once you lose your king, the game is over, right? But you also know that the king doesn't really have much power in the game. The king can only move like one space. There's other characters in the game that have more moving power than the king does. The king's kind of confined to his space. And so if you are just a king alone, you're not going to get through this. It's going to be too hard. Important to surround yourself with other people who have a little bit more capacity than you, and maybe not in your physical home, because I know there's rules around that, but through your phone calls, through your messages, through, you know, what other ways of connecting, phone, like texts, whatever. Make sure you don't feel alone, because if you're feeling alone, you're going to get burnt out. Because we were never meant to do any of this alone. We were meant to do this in community. And right now, we're being forced to not connect with the communities that we belong to. But just because you're not physically there in the community doesn't mean you're not belonging to the community still. And so finding ways to remind yourself that you are not alone. Really important. One of my friends, she was telling me over the phone that her and a friend of hers do a walk together every day with their FaceTime, right? So they, because her friend lives somewhere else and all this like social distance or whatever, so they actually like talk to each other like this while they're walking. And she might look like a crazy person, but she doesn't feel alone, right? She's found a way to connect with someone else who cares for her rather than always being the one to have to care for everyone else. And this is important, really important. We have to be thoughtful about the choices that we're making, right? How are you spending your time, right? Are you giving yourself the things that you need? So what you're seeing here, this is what I call the balance wheel. And it's based on the teachings in transpersonal psychology. That's my training. So transpersonal psychology is the intersection of psychology and spirituality. And so we look at kind of those deeper questions of meaning, of purpose, of, you know, your soul's journey. And so as we're looking at it from that perspective, well, now it's not everybody else's fault, right? Now I can think about what can I do differently to make things a little bit easier for me? Because nobody else is going to do it for you. You have to do it for you. And so if we look at these 6 areas, this is, and you know, I give this to my clients sometimes and I say, okay, let's look at these 6 areas and let's make our own pie, right? If you were to make this circle and if you were to, you know, carve it out, how much time and energy are you giving to your physical well-being? How much space is there for your emotions? How much attempt are you making to connect with community, whether that's your family, whether that's other communities that you belong to? How much are you being intellectually stimulated, right? Are you learning something that's interesting to you? Are you connecting spiritually? And are you doing something creative that just for the sake of doing it? So what I have them do is I have them draw this and then actually make their own chart. And so if you're watching and you happen to have a piece of paper and a pen, you can do this right now, right? Make your circle and break it out into pieces and look at that and look at what that looks like. And then what you would do is you would say, okay, so I've noticed that, okay, so I'll speak for myself. So for me, community was a really small one, right? Because of COVID-19, and I'm just a very kind of, I'm a people person and I wasn't seeing people and it was just really hard on me. And I was like, how do I do this? And my community piece was really small. So now when people ask me to do things, I map it to my wheel. I say, is this something that's going to expand my community block? Because that's what I need right now, is to expand that block. And so if somebody invites me, just yesterday, there was an outdoor playground thing for my kids, and I happened to really like the mom of those kids, and so I stayed and I talked, and we kept our distance and we talked, but I made a choice to stay in that context because I knew it was expanding my need for community in that moment, right? So once you're aware of where you're lacking, then you can make choices and decisions to expand particular areas of your pie. I'm like, does that make sense? But I know you can't answer me. But that's the thinking process behind it. So another tool for you to kind of gauge where you're at and what you need to do. And the thing is, I'm reading all these articles and videos, and they're like, the 3 things you can do to not burn out. And I don't want to take it in that approach. I want to take it in the approach of, this is about how do we not get into sacrifice but remain in service? Because we are wired that way, and we are that's an important value for us, is service. So as caregivers, how do you ensure that you're staying on the service side of things and not leaking into the sacrifice? And this is one of the ways that you take a self-assessment of, where am I and what do I need? And then give yourself that. Give yourself that. Give yourself permission to give yourself that. And it might mean, I have clients who I talk to about self-care and taking time for themselves. And if you've never done it before, it can feel like you're being selfish. And if you've never done it before, people around you will tell you that you're being selfish because they're not used to you doing that. But if you don't do it, you just get more of what you already have, right? If you don't make a change, then nothing changes. And so I would say, test it out. Test it out. Take 15 minutes and close the door and just make it be about you. Or take a walk by yourself without all the people who need you, right? Or watch TV quietly when everybody else has gone to bed and just unwind from that. You have permission to do that. You don't have to be a hero. I'd mentioned this earlier about being a hero, and I want to talk for a moment about roles. So as we talk about choices and how old you are, we want to bring up this concept of roles. So what is a role? So a role is kind of a set of expectations that somebody puts on you when you achieve a certain phase of life. So a role could be mother, right? So a good mother should, right? And so the mothers will have this voice in their head saying, a good mother should, a good mother should, a good mother should, which now is going to move you quickly into sacrifice. Because you can't meet all of those check marks. It's impossible. Another one would be the eldest son, right? In our community, the eldest son or the eldest daughter should. And if you do all the things that the eldest daughter, but here's the problem. Look at me, right? So I have role as a wife, as a mother, as an eldest daughter, as a cousin who cares, as a friend who really deeply cares, and as a therapist. Now, if I'm trying to fulfill all these 6 roles and check off all those boxes, it's actually impossible because some of the things that are required are actually in direct opposition. To be a good mom, I need to be able to spend time with my kids. But to be a good therapist, I need to be able to spend time with my clients. So how do I manage that, right? And one of the ways I manage that is I don't do roles. I just decide not to do roles. I am who I am, and I'm responding to your needs in the moment. It's not about being a good mother. It's not about being a hero. It's not about being a good, a what, whatever. It's about, this is who I am, and this is what I have to give you in this moment. And so one more tool for you before we open it up for questions. And this is called the God box. And for those who haven't heard about it before, you're in luck because I'm going to show you. I have a God box. So what a God box is, I learned it from one of my teachers during my master's program. And what a God box is, it's about recognizing that there's some things that you just can't do. There's some problems that are just too big for you. You can't do it. It's in God's hands. Like, it's just too complicated. If you were to try to figure out how to get there, it would make you crazy. So there's some things we have to acknowledge that are not in our hands. And so the God box is a place to put those things. It's a place to put those things because otherwise they're rolling around in your mind, right? Before you fall asleep, and then you can't sleep because it's rolling around in your mind. So the God box is a place to put those things. Now, for many years, I've had a God box, and it's a family God box. And so we write down things that are too big, and then they go in the box. So one of the things that came up last year for my daughter is that she didn't have a best friend, and she really wanted a best friend. She was in kindergarten. And so she wrote that down in the God box. I want a best friend. And she put it in the box. And then we kind of forgot about it, because what we do is on New Year's Eve, we kind of look through the God box and see what's there. So New Year's Eve, we look through the God box, and guess what? She has a best friend this year. God made it happen, right? And I mean, there's lots of things that made it happen, but we believe that God, like, somebody is listening to us, somebody is working with us. We have to be clear on what we want. Now, there's other things in that God box that are not going to be solved probably in our lifetime. Like, one of the things that my son put in the box was all the whales that are dying in the ocean from plastic. That's what he thinks about at night. That's what keeps him up. He's 11 years old. Put it in the God box. Now, probably this New Year's Eve, probably that won't be solved, and it'll go back into the God box. And it's acknowledging that we can't do everything. There's some things we can't do. So, like I said, we had a family God box, and then when this COVID-19 and the protests and all this stuff started happening, I decided to expand my creative piece of the pie, that I would make myself a new God box. So I wanted to show that to you. I'm very proud of it. So this is what my God box looks like. I took a cardboard box and I painted it, and then I stuck some buttons on it for fun, and I just made some little things, and I made it. And this hole, and so what I did was I made it a box that we cannot open. So because there are things that are happening now that I know if I look at them in a year, they're not going to be solved. So I put it in here, and what's going to happen is when this God box is full, I'm going to just let it go, right? So you'll see the little opening there. So that's an idea. And this is something, if you have children, if you have elders in the home, this is something that the whole family can do together. Each one can make their own. You can make one for the family. And it just lightens up the stress a little bit, because you're saying, we understand that we can't do everything. Some things are only in God's hands. And so that's the God box. And so that's kind of the completion of the formal, informative part of our webinar. We have about 15 minutes now for some of the questions that might have come in. And so I'll just look through and see if we have questions. Okay. So there's a question here about the wheel. So with the wheel, where is the caregiver part? So the wheel is actually about you. The idea is when you do what you need to do for you, then you're a better caregiver because your cup is full, right? So that's where it fits. Community is the piece where you're looking outward to other people and you're actually getting what you need there. Spiritual is where you're looking upward, right? And then the other pieces are what you need to do for you. Safina, you're back. Okay, so you'll be able to read some of these questions out to me, if you don't mind?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, happy to do that. So before we jump into the rest of the questions, I wanted to just take a chance to thank you, Dr. Sarah, for that really great, insightful presentation. I'm sure everyone was smiling and nodding along with you, even if you couldn't see them. I know I definitely was. A lot of the areas really, really resonated with me. I like your activities, your metaphors, all the examples. So very, very helpful. Thank you for that. Before we go into the questions, I do just quickly want to remind the audience about the Access Hotline while we have it here on the screen. So just a reminder that this hotline is available to provide you with information and access to resources within and outside the Jamaat. So if you do have any questions, if you're looking for support in any way, you can call the Access line at the number here, 1-888-536-3599. And so with that, we'll jump into the rest of the questions. And if you do have questions for Dr. Sarah, please feel free to enter those into the chat function and we can address them if we have time. So some of the other questions that came up throughout the presentation, I'll read a couple of them out. So one was, Maulana Hazra Imam has shared with us that if we have to do handholding in order to support each other, then we should even handhold. Do you believe that the other person will not take advantage of you because you truly want them to have a better quality of life?
So here's the thing. You can't control what the other person does. All we can do is make sure we don't go into the sacrifice mode. That's all we can do. So the other person may try to take advantage. And when that starts happening, that's when you have to put up a little bit of a boundary and say, wait, I just need a break. I need to go look after me before I can come back to this. So yeah, they might take advantage, but we can't control them. We can control our responses to them.
That's great to keep in mind. Thank you. Just focusing on what we can and can't control. Another question here. I have a parent with dementia at home, and it's been almost a few years. I've been taking care of them nonstop. And at times I feel burned out and out of energy, and there is no rest. How do I make room for self-care as their primary caregiver?
Yeah, it's a hard one, right? It's a really hard one, especially somebody who needs that ongoing 24-hour support. So the thing about dementia is you can't even really get mad at the person, right? Because they're driving you crazy, but you know it's not their fault. They're not trying to deliberately, be difficult. It's just how their brain is functioning right now. And so one of the things, if you're the primary caregiver, there may be some things that you can do that are kind of joint care activities. So something like going for a walk outside, if that's something that they're able and capable to do, going for a walk outside and noticing as you're walking, actually breathing the air and noticing as you're walking the trees, notice as you're walking the sun, like being really mindful while you're here supporting this other person. Another thing could be some shows that you want to watch, right? So you watch them together, but while you're watching the show, here's a strategy that I want to teach you, that I teach a lot of my clients. So I call it the golden bubble of light. Okay, so we imagine ourselves in this golden bubble of light. And the only thing that can get into the golden bubble of light are things that are going to make us better and brighter and stronger. And things that don't do that are just going to bounce off that golden bubble of light. We just let them bounce off. We don't absorb them. And so if you're in the same house with someone, you can have that golden bubble of light around you and know that it's not personal. It's a practice. You have to kind of do it a few times until you start getting the feel of it. But the idea is to remember that, because it sounds from the question like the person feels that burden and that responsibility, right? That heaviness. And so I would say to look at where in the scenario could you be more responsive rather than responsible. And there's online, there's community, right? There's community of others who look after their parents who have dementia. There are communities of people out there. Find them, talk to them over the computer if you have to. You don't have to be in this alone. I know it feels very lonely because you're the only one, but others are having the same experience as you. And if you can connect to those others, you can be a bit of that social support for each other.
That's great, thank you. Another question we've got here. How could you help a 42-year-old son who has mental health challenges, who watches news all the time, is often talking negatively about others? Do you have any advice or suggestions for someone who's in such a situation about how they could help communicate with their son in a different way?
Mm-hmm. So so again, not sure which of the mental health issues that the son has. So I would answer differently if I knew it was depression, or I knew if it was anxiety, or if I knew if it was dementia or whatever. So a general response would be, what is it that you can do to make it a little easier for him? What are the things that you can do and maybe turning off the TV is not going to make it easier for him right now. He needs that and he's engaged there. Maybe what might make it a little bit easier for him is to ask him questions and really listen. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to solve it, but just listen to what he's going through and not feel like, and it's hard when you're a parent to not feel like you're the one who has to fix it. But remember, we can't do this alone. And so that might be one thing you can do, is to have conversations without letting yourself fix it. Right? I would suggest you go back to that, the handout with the service versus the sacrifice, and see if you can do more of the things on the service side. Right? That's another way to get through. The other thing is to drop the role of mother, good mother. What does a good mother or a good father do? Rather, it's what do I have the capacity to do in this moment? And it doesn't make me a good mother, bad father. It's just, what do I have the capacity for? What you can offer your child will be very different than what somebody else can offer their child. And that's okay. I truly believe, truly and deeply, that we chose our parents. We came into this for a reason. We came into these families for a reason. And so we have these kind of spiritual connections with each other. And if we can look beyond the material, physical problems and go back to that bond, that spiritual bond, that can also help.
That's great, thank you. A related question here is about how does one manage if there are two individuals in the family with mental health challenges and that this individual doesn't have any help or support in supporting those family members?
Right. And it's so the more stressors you have, the more self-care you need. Simple as that. And it may be that you put yourself in, I've done it, lock yourself in the bathroom for 15 minutes and listen to a song you love. Whatever. But the more stressors you have, the more self-care you're going to need. So if now you have two people, well, then that individual needs to be comfortable enough to look after yourself in all of the ways that we discussed. And maybe some of it might just be the God box. It's like, I can't do this, somebody help me, right? So, but even admitting that it's hard to do, that's a big first step, because it's taboo, right? To say that I actually can't handle what's happening in my home. We don't want to say that. So the fact that you're able to say that and ask about that, that's a big first step. And I know with the access line, again, to connect there and see what are some resources that might be available, even just for you to talk, right? Maybe not to solve the problem, but just for you to have a place to talk. These are some of the things that I would suggest in that situation.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, we've got a few more here. So the next question is, I talk to my children about the mental demand that I feel sometimes, and when they constantly have needs that I cannot meet right away, especially during COVID-19. I think it's important for them to know when I feel overwhelmed, as I have less patience, but I do wonder if that's a healthy approach to let them know what I'm going through and how I need space and help from time to time. Any thoughts on this approach?
Oh, I wish I knew how old the kids were. So person who asked that question, if you could quickly type in, how old are your kids? Because then that makes a difference, right? If they're teenagers, yeah, they should know they're stressing you out. If they're little, right? If they're little, then you say it in an age appropriate way. So you would say something like, you know, mommy's feeling just so busy right now. I'm just feeling really busy. I just need 5 minutes to just not feel busy. Can you come sit with me and we can cuddle for 5 minutes? Right? Or that's not always the case, or I'm in the middle of something right now and I will get to you. Because usually when kids are being that needy, it's because they're not getting their attachment need met. They're not getting their enough bonding. And that's why they're being so clingy. And so what Dr. Gordon Neufeld talks about 7 to 14 minutes a day. 7 to 14 minutes a day of dedicated play with your kids, unstructured. So that could mean wrestling around on the floor. That could mean playing dolls. That could mean playing Frisbee, like unstructured play, 7 to 14 minutes. That's all a kid needs. That total undivided attention for a very short period of time. And chances are they'll stop. And when they do, they'll understand that you're coming. You'll be there. And so I would ask myself, are there ways in the day that I can connect with them more so that they're not pulling at me all the time because they feel see, who fills up their chai cup? You, right? You're the one. You're the parents are the ones who fill up the chai cup for the children, along with, you know, the divine presence, of course, but children don't know that. They know that their parents are there to fill them up. So if they're feeling empty, they're going to come to you. And then if you're feeling empty, so remembering to fill your own cup, give them from the piali. And if you have nothing in the piali, then do whatever you need to do, and it doesn't have to take long. One of the things we talk about in therapy is what we call micro self-care. So not like going for a massage or going for a pedicure. It's not about that. It's about taking 2 minutes. Okay, everyone on this call, I want to teach you something that's going to be like diamond, okay? So let's do this together. So what you're going to do is get comfortable in your chair. And what we're going to do is something called soft belly breathing. And so this is a technique that calms down our entire physiology, and it just soothes us. It soothes us, and so we're not in that like tension mode. So it's very simple. All you're going to do is breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose. Breathe out through your mouth. Breathe in through your nose. Breathe out through your mouth. And just continue to breathe slowly and deeply, just letting your belly be very soft. Just take a couple more of those full, deep breaths. And just with 5 or 7 of those breaths, notice how you feel. Notice how your body feels. Notice how your inner space is feeling. It's golden, and it doesn't cost you anything. You can do it anywhere. If you feel like, because I know sometimes it's like, oh, here she goes again with her breathing. So you can do it privately, like you can separate yourself and go do the breathing if that's what you need to do. Another thing that's really helping people right now is music. So if you're feeling sad and you have nowhere to put that, listen to some sad music or watch a sad movie and let it come. If you're feeling angry, watch something that makes you angry and let it come. Because there's so much emotion up for people right now and they don't have anywhere to put it. So music and movies are a good way to move some of the heavy emotion that's up for a lot of us right now. The ages of the kids, 12 to, yeah, absolutely they can know. And again, not to blame them, but to say, right now, there's a lot of things pulling at me. So give me 4 o'clock, we'll get together and we'll hang out. But make that time. And it could be the time with the whole group together. It's helpful if you have some time individually, and that sometimes is bedtime, right? Where you have a little bit of individual time with each of the children, which is hard when you have 4 kids. But that's what I would suggest. And also, if there's other adults in your house, enlist them. Make them part of it, whether it's another parent or there's grandparents, aunts and uncles, whoever's in the house. Let's try to do this with others as well, and not have to be the good mom that's doing everything.
Great, thank you so much. I know we've just got a couple of minutes left. We do have 2 more questions, so I'll read them both out and then we'll see if we've got time to address both, and we'll leave just a minute or so to wrap up at the end. So the final questions cover topics of so for someone who's struggling with exhaustion and insomnia, any suggestions for them on how to sleep better? And then the second question is, how do you cope with feelings of resentment if you're getting a lack of support from your family? So how do you prevent those feelings of resentment from affecting your true service of caregiving?
That second question is so great because I asked that question at a webinar about 3 months ago, the exact same question. I know what that feels like when you're just getting angrier and angrier because the people around you aren't doing anything, especially if they're adults and you feel like you're doing everything. And so for what the answer was and what really helped me for that resentment question is to think about your why. To think about your why. Why am I doing this? And some of the things you'll probably find you don't really need to do at the level that you're doing them at. Remember I talked earlier about choosing? So maybe dinner has to be made, but maybe it doesn't have to be a gourmet dinner. Maybe it could be simplified, right? Maybe the dishes need to be washed, but maybe the kids can do it. Even though they're not going to do as good of a job as you, at least it's done, right? So delegating as much as you can. Now, if the other adults in your house aren't helping, I enlist the children. That's what I do. Enlist the children. And children as young as 4 years old can do laundry because it's just putting something in the thing and pressing a button. Doesn't take much, right? And then moving it from here to here and pressing another button with supervision. But my 7-year-old, my 11-year-old, they do their own laundry and they don't fold it the way I like it, absolutely, but one less thing, right, for me to do. That question about guilt, and I know we're kind of coming up to time here. Guilt is an unnecessary it's an unnecessary emotion. It doesn't get you anywhere. When you're in guilt, you know you're in sacrifice. And so that could be kind of what is it, like a marker for you that, okay, this is an indicator that I've slipped into sacrifice right now. So I need to do more for myself and self-care. Was that the question about guilt, or was there, exhaustion? Okay.
There was, yes, so exhaustion and insomnia.
So exhaustion and insomnia, exhaustion is a sign of burnout, and insomnia is a sign of like just racing thoughts and anxiety. So one of the things you might want to try with insomnia is something around sleep hygiene. So there's lots of information online about sleep hygiene. I'll make it really simple. You go to bed the same time every night, or at least you get into bed the same time every night. You do not have any electronics in your room at night. You wake up a similar time every morning, even if you've had a rough night's sleep. You wind down, so in the last hour before bed, you're not engaging in screens because the light from the screens actually messes up our circadian rhythms. So you actually want to be away from screens for the last hour before you get into bed. So these are some sleep hygiene techniques. And when you actually get serious about, because you know these things, this is nothing new, I'm telling you. When you actually do it, you might start to find changes. And then if the insomnia continues, I would actually seek professional help, because you need sleep. And if you're not getting sleep for long periods of time, you'll start doing things that you don't want to be doing. So if it's going on and on and on and sleep hygiene isn't working, then I would say seek professional support for that.
Great, thank you. So that's all we have time for this evening. Once again, a huge thank you to Dr. Syra for her words of wisdom, her helpful advice. I'm sure the session will stick with many of us as we carry on with our lives during this busy time. Before we wrap up, I wanted to quickly mention the webinar survey. In order for us to continually improve these webinars, we would like to request your feedback. So there will be a post-webinar evaluation survey, which will appear on your screen once the session ends. So please do take just a minute or two of your time to complete the survey, since it will help us inform future webinars. And with that, this concludes our webinar. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. We hope you're able to take some of these lessons learned about burnout into the rest of your week and beyond that. Thank you again for joining. And as we learned this evening, don't forget to refill your cup of chai before it gets empty. Thank you, and Yali Madad.
Bye, Yali Madad.